Alright, so taking apart the 425 here. First thing that I like to do is I've already, pretty simple stuff. I've already disconnected the battery and everything. The battery is actually disconnected, if you noticed in the video that I posted previously. The first thing I do when I'm working on them is disconnect the battery, or at least the very minimum the ground. You can see this machine got the typical rust that you'd see from batteries leaking, stuff like that. Not a terribly big deal there. Next thing I'm going to do, now unfortunately I wasn't really able to show you taking the sheet metal off. The hood was already off it when I bought it. But then I mean my hands were all wet and everything when I was trying to take the fender pan and the footrest off. But those are two separate pieces. After the I thought I was gonna have to sneeze there for just a minute. So what I'm gonna do next is I've actually gone ahead and dropped the hangers for the deck. I'll actually take the deck arms off here in just a little bit. But the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the fuel tank. So what I've done, a lot of times on these machines you'll hear needs a new sender unit. This is a sender unit right here. That's the pickup. That's for the fill. It tells you how full it is. Everything else, that is what that is. So all I've done is disconnected the fuel hose. Now the 445 is going to be a little bit different because it's going to have some high pressure fuel lines. Meanwhile, the 425 is just a traditional. Since it's a carbureted engine, you don't need high pressure fuel lines. But all you have to do is just basically undo that, and then you can actually lift this unit out. Nice yellow gas in there. Not shocked about that. I think you could hear this run in one of the videos, and you see the floats on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set this out here in this little box right here, and I'm just going to let it evaporate in the sun for right now. So that's the fuel unit. Nothing really wrong there per se. It works just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and it'll sit there and dry out and everything. Next, we can go ahead and actually we're not going to put this back on there quite yet. We're going to drain the old fuel out. So you can see there's still a little bit of fuel left in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take and I'm going to drain this into probably a 5-gallon bucket. There's not enough to really worry about. It's older gas, so I'm not going to pour it in my new gas supply. So probably what I'll do is just while it's sitting in that bucket, I'll just set it out in the sun and it'll evaporate for the most part. There's probably less than a 1/4 gallon in here, so I'm not really too concerned about it. Alright, so just like I said, there was really almost less than a 1/4 gallon in it. That's a gallon jug right there. So I'm just going to let that sit out in the open for the afternoon. I think most of the sun will bake that away. And then also at the same time, I went ahead and the tank dried out pretty good. And now the tank's dry. I went ahead and rinsed it out with some water. There wasn't much of residual gas or anything. The black plastic on these, you can see that it's already drying from where I sprayed it out. So this should dry pretty quick. I'll turn it over here in a little bit. Some of the odd things you find in gas tanks, this was in there, whatever that is, piece of plastic. But that came floating out when I put the water in there. So what I'm going to do is let that sit there. I'll turn it over to get more of the water out here in just a little bit. This is drying nicely. I actually came back in and sprayed it with some brake clean and everything. Get the last of the residual gas off of it. That way when it goes on a shelf it'll be fine. And yeah, so now we're progressing nicely. Have the gas tank gone. So yesterday I actually pulled the gas tank up when I washed everything off, because always on the top of these transaxles and everything, they're nice and greasy and whatnot. So if you haven't ever seen the top of one of these transaxles, you have the input on the drive shaft. That is from the engine. And then you have basically the hydraulic lines that come out. They'll be set up differently depending on the unit. And so basically this right here is the charge pump, and this will what will basically produce the pressure, and then all of this back here is the drive line. Your clutch pack for your PTO is right in here. That drives the PTO out of the front, and also if you have a rear PTO, it'll drive that. So this is the vent right here. Not too terribly concerned about the transaxle right now. I'm going to focus mostly on the front of the tractor. But from this view right here, you see the deck height knob right there, the deck height gauge right there. You see that cylinder looking thing right there is power steering cylinder. So you can actually see the shaft from the steering wheel come down to that cylinder right there, and that's where the power steering will go. Then you have all the brake linkages, hydraulic linkages are right here. So that one and that one, that one lower one's disconnected, but those are going to the hydraulic outlets over here. Now the hydraulic outlets, they're for the blade and or loader or any other front attachment. You can see this one also has the lockout valve installed. So this right here, this is your float detent right here. So this is basically everything you need to control your hydraulics. On the engine, we went kind of over this in the previous video. All your wiring, I still have all my jerry-rigged wiring from the other day. Starters right here, coils right here, head of the engine, valve cover. Your flywheel's back in here. You have your isolator, your drive shaft. That basically to reduce the vibrations and just give a little bit of play for the drive shaft going into the transaxle. And then down into there you have your igniter. Now one of the things that I find people do quite frequently is they'll buy a machine and it's not running, and they will go and throw $400 or $500 worth of parts at it without really needing to throw much of anything. So when you're doing this, I actually got this machine to run with 2 alligator clamp lines that I just keep on the shelf. I didn't need to go out and buy any new parts or anything like that. So when you buy a new machine, take your time. If it's not running, don't just start throwing parts at stuff, because if you start throwing parts at stuff, you could potentially cost yourself a lot of money that you don't need to pay. I know when I first got into 318s a long time ago, I get a new machine that didn't run. The first thing I do is go to eBay and buy a coil and a condenser. And then I put the coil and condenser on and it would run, and then it would keep doing the same thing. Well, then I buy a carburetor, it just kept, my first 318, I can't remember how much, I threw just an absolute absurd amount of money at it, when the whole time, if I'd have taken my time and actually kind of walked through a process, and at the same time read some technical manuals and read some online threads, stuff like that, I fixed it for less than $60 in the end. So that's what actually prompted me to start doing videos, was the 318 stuff, and then obviously it's progressed since then. Then you got your muffler right here. I'm actually going to toss that muffler. It's got some cracks and stuff like that, so it's no good. Saw a lot of smoke come out of it the other day. And then up here, you have your carburetor and your fuel shutoff solenoid. I went over that. And then over the side, the same thing. Radiators right there. Nothing's really up in the front. There should be a shield right here for a heat shield for the muffler, but I don't have that. So obviously don't have it. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at right now. Probably the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull the engine out. That'll take me a little while. Basically just have to undo all the connections, and then there's 2 bolts on each side, those bolts right there. And then we should just be able to lift the engine out. I might go ahead and take the air cleaner off, and I got to drain the coolant as well. So one of the things I did want to say about the gas and everything, there's a million different ways to dispose of things legally, environmentally soundly, etc., etc. I do this, twice a year maybe, where I have to get rid of gas. So how I do it may not necessarily be the best for everyone, but it's just something to think about. So that's my piece on that.